Hey, my homies. Welcome to the Please Do Tell podcast, where every episode is a journey into the stories that shape us. I am your host, Ronnika Williams, creator of the Story Salon and Retracing Their Steps project. Join me as we uncover the hidden narratives of the Great Migration and explore the stories passed down from our ancestors. Together, we'll travel through time, connect communities, and share the voices that make us who we are. So pull up a chair and let us dive into the stories that speak to our soul. Trying something a little different today, my homies. But I'm excited to share with you all what has happened in the month of September. I feel like I should be queuing up Earth, Wind, and Fire, but just kind of sing it in your head for the moment, okay? Thanks. So on September 5th, I wanted to recap a little bit before we dive right into story time. September 5th, we were able to launch the Retracing Their Steps first exhibit. I'm so excited. Like, you all should have seen me just the week leading up, even the days leading up to Retracing Their Steps. You saw me some of everywhere. It was a couple of childhood friends that I ran into when I was at the different places, printing and picking up items for the exhibit that I was able to even share with them, like, hey, there's an exhibit that's coming up that's launching on Thursday, and it's going to be at the Morton House through the month of September and into October. So if you are in the Benton Harbor area, I encourage you to go and check out the Retracing Their Steps. Of course, Alicia will call me now. I text her like, hey girl, when's your free time? So she's going to see this episode and like, oh, that was when I called. Okay. The Retracing Their Steps exhibit, just go check it out. It's at the Morton House Museum in Benton Harbor, Michigan on Territorial Road. They're open Wednesdays and Saturdays from 11 to 2. But if you want to do a special viewing, just be sure to give Mr. Chuck a jingle, okay? All right, so you all, let's get into what we'll be talking about today, which it'll be more Retracing Their Steps, but I'm kind of giving you a behind the scenes story of how it even came together. So, roots and routes. And the background of this is basically talking about the Great Migration and how it even came about and how I even got encouraged to even tell these type of stories, because my family was impacted by it quite a bit. Okay. All right. So during the Great Migration, millions of Black families left the South in search of better opportunities. So today's story, I'm going to talk about that journey and how that even led up to how I am in this seat today. Whew. All right. So the year was 1915, and let me just go back a little bit further, because I feel like I've told you pieces of the story, but not the full story since I even decided to be transparent enough to tell this story. So I'm going to start with how my emotions were even building the exhibit. So Story Salon is a nonprofit that I started a little over 2 years ago. Full board 501c3, just excited to even have that, to even be able to say that and share that with you all. And your girl has done many projects, but the love of my life is really Story Salon, as we will continue to see. And of course, it's Please Do Tell, but Please Do Tell definitely ties into that. But Story Salon is my newest baby. When I was asked to do a family tree in undergrad, I was dumbfounded because I didn't know much about my granny's side of the family, which is my dad's mom. And because there's so much mystery and secrets that come within this story, I was really afraid to tell it. And so when it came to this exhibit, I had to go back to the teachings that I had learned at North Carolina Central and even being an intern at the historic Stackville in Durham, North Carolina. While I was an intern at the historic Stackville, one of the projects that I was tasked with is trying to find as much information about the African American community that was at that were actually enslaved on at historic Stagville. And as I was in the library researching at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill's Wilson Library has, well, I know back then, this was, we're talking 2011, 2010, 2011, is where all the historic Stagville papers are housed or were housed, or they should still be there. So I went into Chapel Hill, Wilson's library, and I began diving through all these papers and reading correspondence between the Benahan family, which is the family that owned the property. They were the slave masters on that plantation. And then we have the Cameron family, which a lot of people don't really understand the connection between University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the Cameron family. The Cameron family actually is a huge part of why University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill is there. So you could think about like the stadiums, the streets, everything is named after the Cameron family. But the Cameron family is actually attached to the Benahan family, which owned historic Stagville, the largest plantation in North Carolina. So when we think about the enslaved population that was there, these are many families that are navigating life, not within their own, with many restrictions. Let's just say that, with many restrictions. And as I continued to go through these papers, I thought, wow, someone actually kept these. We're able to read through them. We're able to get an understanding for ourselves and ask questions of what was actually happening back then. And for a lot of people, they're like, oh my gosh, that's so boring. But for myself, as you're able to really understand how we've come from the past to the present, hopefully shaping the future. So one of the first projects that I did was an exhibit that I actually showed you in previous episodes, because I still had the flyer in my own personal archives. And I can remember being in that in the Wilson Library, talking about what I had learned about the African American population that was at Stagville, that resided at Stagville. And after 1865, and they were actually declared free, they were still sharecroppers. So they were still staying on the land because of numerous reasons, right? So then that kind of perked me, or not, well, I would say it kind of lit a fire under me to research my own history. No, I didn't know that my family was from Virginia, North Carolina. I wasn't sure, but that's the majority of where the population of Black people that came in, and they came through Jamestown, they came through the coast because, Atlantic slave trade. So as I began to research my own family's history, I had to start with a name. And that name was Steele. My dad gave me that name back in 2005 or 6 when I was in a geography class, and I was asking him about my family history. And he said, oh my goodness, I don't know much. I just know that there was a name change, but our original name was Steele. So knowing that name stuck with me for many, many years, when I began to actually dive through my family's history, is what am I going to uncover? What has the family been hiding? And how did we get from Arkansas, as I thought, to Michigan? Being that my grandparents were both, and my mother were a part of the Great Migration. It's so hard to tell these stories because they actually bring up different emotions, but I'm going to push through it, okay? Okay. So when I found out that the Steele family was actually from an area in Alabama, it raised many questions. Are they still there? Why did they leave? Did they come north? Why don't we have the same last name? My grandmother was born in Burns, so it begins to ask those questions of, Were there two different families? Why are there certain family secrets that we don't choose to talk about? Like saying if there, for example, my great granddad, he had a wife named Ada, according to the 1910 census. And then by the 1930 census, he had a wife by the name of May. That's what it said in there, May. And I thought, well, was there an illness there? Did she die? Where's all this coming from? So that's where my cousin Kelvin comes in at. I was able to connect with a cousin that's in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was able to give my family's history to me. So my great granddad, who was born Lonnie Steele, was born in Alabama, and during a time of the Jim Crow era, he had an altercation with a gentleman named Thomas Smiley. In the newspaper, it states that Thomas Smiley was murdered, well, good citizen murdered by an unruly Negro. That is the first article. In the second article, that is in December of 1915, we talk about how Lonnie Steele is now on the run. When I connected with family in also Steele's in the Detroit area, they began to tell me the story of how the escape even happened. So the escape goes from my great granddad and his brother, allegedly, because I don't know much about this story. Like this part wasn't actually documented in the newspaper. So my great granddad and his brother actually hopped on a train in Thomaston, Alabama, which you will see that is a part of the exhibit. Hopped on a train to Michigan, and that one brother stayed in Michigan, whereas my great grandfather went back south, which is unheard of. If you're on the run, it's like stay on the run, don't go back south, don't do it. So Lonnie goes back south, and he's still on the run. He's corresponding with his other brother. Now, mind you, there's like over 11 of them that were born to Cornelius Steele, which is my great-great-grandfather, was born to Cornelius Steele and his wife, Lillian. So you're going back and forth like, okay, why did he go back south? Went back south to get his family, and then they ended up in Louisiana. And as I'm following the path of my great granddad, I'm going by the correspondence that was with his brother Judge, who remained in Alabama. And it's so funny that I even think about with Lonnie going on the run, I was thinking, like, wasn't the rest of the family in harm's way if one person had committed a crime? How did the rest of the Steels were untouched? So then that raise the question of, like, what really happened that night between Lonnie Steele and Thomas Smiley? So Lonnie ends up in Louisiana, and then as Judge Steele Sr. tells his family, or his family's narrative, that branch of the tree says, when I arrived to the last place that I know that he was at, they said that he was deceased. So that would be my great uncle Judge would communicate with his brother Lonnie Steele, because Lonnie was letting the family know, like, hey, I'm okay, I'm fine. So once he makes it to Louisiana, and these are all narratives that is being passed down through the family. Once he makes it to Louisiana, he corresponds with Judge. Judge then makes his way to Louisiana, and once he gets there, they said that Lonnie is deceased and he's buried. And I'm thinking, that can't be right, because how did my grandmother get here, right? So the thing was, Lonnie gets to Louisiana, leaves his family there, and then migrates to Arkansas, where there is a sister of his father that lives there. And that's when he becomes John Burns, marries another woman, and starts a new family. And that is just one layer of our Great Migration story. So, with that second wife, which in one chapter of my thesis, I'm saying, Ada versus Mary, are they the same person? As I continued to do the research, I thought, Mary isn't even my great grandmother's name. Her name is actually Miranda. So see how just with the census and we're getting confused, and I'm just like, who's who? So Miranda, and now Lonnie still becomes John Burns. And they begin a life together. And their oldest daughter would be Mary Magdalene Burns, which is my grandmother. So I'm actually sending you through that journey when my grandmother decides to leave. She does her own Great Migration because as I was going through the census, I was looking through, I was trying to, because we're able to access the census up to the 1950s, right? Now 1950 census. So anything after 1950, we're not able to access yet. So I'm going through the 1940 census because my grandmother was born in 1921. And I'm going through the census and I'm like, I can't find my grandmother anywhere. Like, she's moved out of the house with the Burns family. She's not in Arkansas anymore. She's not listed. Where is she? So as I continue to dig through obituaries, which you all know my obsession with obituaries, and my first job being reading obituaries to my grandfather every night, I began to piece together my grandmother's siblings. So then I realized that my grandmother's mother, who is Miranda, also had children before she was married before. So this is for my great grandfather and my great grandmother. For John Burns and Miranda, this was their second marriages, both of their second marriages. So I'm digging through the stuff and I noticed that my grandmother has a sister that died in the 1940s from tuberculosis, and they list in the obituary all these siblings, and I'm like, okay, who are their parents? So I began digging in the census, going back further, and I noticed that my great grandmother Miranda had, like I said, a previous marriage. So she has children. So her children are now living in Louisiana. So that's what made me think that Ada and Miranda was the same person. Because why is everybody setting up shop in Louisiana? I go into the 1940 census and I see the name and I'm like, Mary Boone. I don't know that name, so let me just keep on moving along. So in this book that my dad began to record our family history after my grandmother died, my great aunts and my great uncle were giving my dad as much information as they knew because they were the youngest babies or the youngest children. Because my great aunt told me to stop saying babies. Well, they were the youngest children. And I look and it says that my grandmother graduated high school in Louisiana. So when I did the Retracing Their Steps, I can understand why she went to school in Louisiana, because there was nothing. There wasn't education. There was an education system in Arkansas. So where she grew up is maybe it was right on the border of Louisiana and Arkansas. So it was usually a hop, skip, and a jump to get into Louisiana as I was driving through these places. And so I'm driving through, and then I thought, like, in that 1940 census, it's supposed to say Mary Burns instead of Mary Boone. So I was thinking about the long Southern drawl. Maybe they said, oh, well, stating the names of who's in the household is Mary Boone, which is supposed to be Mary Burns. So that's how I was able to connect the dots with my dad's collecting the information from his aunts and uncles to what was in the census. And that's how I was able to figure out that my grandmother graduated high school from Bastrop High in Morehouse, Louisiana. And I thought, okay, so what does she do after that? She moves back to Arkansas, gets married, and then they migrate. Her and Mr. Marshall migrate to Michigan. I'm thinking, and now I've moved a lot. Anyone that knows me knows that I've moved a lot myself. But to follow the paths of, well, what led you there? And even looking at my own mother's story, because she's, as I said, she's a part of the Great Migration as well, is that they were coming to this area for better opportunities. And the automotive industry was starting to boom, right? So my grandmother was a domestic, and her first husband is named Malachi Marshall, and she has one child named Betty. And they live in a part of Benton Harbor that they call Benton Township. And she is literally walking distance from her sister who died in the 1940s. So you got to think like these are siblings that are in the same area. They migrated for better opportunity, and one of them dies. And then you get word from Arkansas from your father that your mother is deceased. So your three youngest siblings, I'm speaking like my grandmother, your three youngest siblings now migrate themselves from Arkansas to Michigan. Are you following me? Because I know it's a lot. And my Aunt Jessie that lives in California, she's still living, still vibrant. And she said she got married very young. When she migrated, her husband was a Buffalo Soldier, and he came and got her, and they got married, and they resided in California until he passed, and she is still there. But I couldn't help but think like, okay, my grandmother takes in these children. She now has her own child, and now she's deciding to divorce her husband. Divorce. Like, because I know growing up, my elders always say, you better stick it out. We don't divorce. You better stick it out. But then I was like, oh, my grandmother was somebody, because she was like, listen, this isn't working and I'm out. I'm out of here. She moves to Chicago with her daughter. And I'm like, what's in Chicago? Another sister of hers, my Aunt Dolly. She's in the Robbins, Illinois area. And if you don't know about Robbins, Illinois, that is where a lot of African Americans, Black Americans, whomever how you like to address it. But hey, they migrated from the South and set up shop in a community called Robbins. So you can, it's a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of retracing their steps stories that are in Robbins, because even me and my best friend Chantel, we share connections to Robbins as well. Both of our families share connections to Robbins. And I'm mapping my grandmother's route, and I'm like, okay, she's in Robbins. Well, how does she meet my granddad if he's in Benton Harbor, Michigan? So my granddad, John Williams, migrated from Mississippi. He was married, had children, and migrated to Michigan. So how did he meet my grandmother? So the story goes, my grandfather was separated from his first wife, now divorced, and he was looking for a new wife. And I was like, is this kind of like The Color Purple? Like Mr. looking for a new wife? But it's not like that at all. Like I was thinking like, okay. But my grandmother and her oldest child, they're now living in Chicago, in the Robbins area with her sister. And my grandfather, John, is traveling to Chicago, or Robbins, Chicago, same thing, to see her. Like, how does he find her? So I go to my grandparents' marriage certificate, and I'm trying to see like, okay, who's the witnesses and all of this. And then I noticed the last name of Wilder. I'm like, hmm. So after having a conversation with my Aunt Jessie, I thought that the Wilders were related to our family, and let's see if I can mock her. She said, them your granddaddy people. Columbus and them your granddaddy people. He would come over there and pick us up, and we'd go to the house of David. I said, mental note, okay. Good to know. So I go to this marriage certificate, and I see Wilder on the bottom. So all I can think is, if that's my granddaddy's people, and my great aunt was married to a Wilder before she died, that's gotta be how you met my grandmother, right? So then he courts my grandmother. He persuades her to move back to Michigan. He must have said like, "Hey, I've got this great life for you back there. I'm going to build this house and we're just going to build this family together." So they move back to Michigan and they reside on Main Street, East Main Street. The house is still standing there, 1070 East Main Street. That is where the Williams reside. So, you all, I'm going to give you more of a sneak peek of what it was like retracing their steps and how I put that into an exhibit. Are you ready? Let's go. Okay. So, okay, we're going to try it one more time. Okay. So shout out to my best friend Chantel, because she was able to grab this footage of the retracing their steps line. So this is that actual beginning, and you see that there's actually footprints on the ground, so you're able to follow through. So this is the family archive. So in the top left corner is my grandparents, and then in the bottom right hand corner where you saw that little arrow was my great grandmother. That's my grandmother's graduation photo. That is my grandfather John Williams. That is me actually pointing to where they lived. My grandparents lived before they even got married. So this beautiful thing right here in the middle is the migration map. And that's what I want you to really, really focus on. That map is what I need you to interact with when you go to this exhibit. You're supposed to map out your family's migration route. Now I'm able to include my dad's uniform. Shout out to Siobhan in the video. And then we're leading up to the audio section, which you're able to listen to how I found my family. And that last picture is me actually standing on the steel land. Y'all, it's been just mind-blowing, and I just think like, my goodness, I'm just starting. Like, I'm only at the part where my grandparents get married and start to have children together and raise, and they didn't do step. They never did step. So my grandmother's children, my grandfather's children, blended family, right? My brother will always tell you that we are the blended families of all blended families, which we really are. And my dream was always to have a big family, to either come from one or make one. And as I continue to do the retracing their steps, I realize how much family I really have. I know that some people are really against the ancestry, doing the DNA and all of that. But without me doing that, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now. I wouldn't be able to find, because my story it's unique in a lot of ways, but it's also a part of the narrative of Black folks migrating to other places and losing contact with their family. But with mine, it was caused by a name change, by an unfortunate murder that led to my great grandfather going into this, I would say 40 years of being on the run, either physically or even mentally. Can you imagine just not being at peace all your life because of a decision that you made? But that decision that he made made my grandmother, who made my father, who produced me. Whew. All right. So we all have a great migration story. We all do. And I want you to really think about how this is a collective experiences, and it shaped our entire community. It shaped multiple communities. So when I say like, oh, this is the first of Retracing Their Steps, because there's going to be multiple Retracing Their Steps stories. There's going to be a way to track our people through the census, through our own personal census, through that map, because as I stated before, the most recent census is from 1950. We get the census every 72 years. So I won't see myself in the census until I'm in my 80s, 90s, because I plan to be around that long, okay? And this is a way to reconnect with communities, families, and really reclaim the village that I talk about often. So as I'm doing this exhibit, after the exhibit launches on September 5th, which would have been my dad's 75th birthday, I go in on Saturday to the Morton House Museum, and I walk in and I see Commissioner Mamie Yarborough. And the beautiful thing about Mamie, she said, I've lived here all my life, so I know quite a bit of history. She was able to share with my mother, on my mother's side, is that my Aunt Margie was the first Black woman to be married at the Morton House. You see how community and being connected to community can actually pour into your own history. And that's what I think about with Retracing Their Steps. With doing this exhibit, people are able to tell their own stories, and they're able to reconnect with families that they grew up with, families that helped them along the way. Mamie was able to talk about, which I call Queen Mamie, she was able to talk about just the railroad routes, and how just a lot of German immigrants ended up in the area. And I just stood there like, can we do more of these, please? So with Retracing Their Steps, we have now birthed the idea of doing these monthly story times. And I'm really excited about that. Launching next month we're having, I would say, our elders come in and actually talk about what it was like, the families that they grew up with, and the stories that they're willing to share. And the reason why I decided to go this route is that when I worked at the Boys and Girls Club, is that I had a lot of cousins that were coming in, and they were asking those questions of like, who are my family? They're standing next to them in pictures and didn't know it. So this is a way to connect the young people with their family. So it's Retracing Their Steps has its own branches, and it's really blossomed into something beautiful. But here's my charge for you. I want you to reflect on your own family's journey and get involved with the Story Salon with the Retracing Their Steps project. If you want to be able to do your own, or even be able to get resources on how you can do your own, or just even, I don't know where I come from, we want to be able to help you with that. Okay? So be sure to follow us on all social media. We're Story Salon. We're the Story Salon on both Facebook and Instagram. And then we have a website now, thestorysalon.org. So you're able to connect with us that way as well. So have you started? Are you even interested in starting? Let's start there, okay? Excuse me. What does home mean to you? And how has your family's journey shaped your sense of identity? Before I began Retracing Their Steps, I had to deal with my own grief of losing my father, because I felt like even from the ages of 12 to 16, my dad was burying a lot of family members. Or even before that, even before my grandmother passed, I feel like every year as I go back and look at obituaries, it was a sibling of hers dying either every year or every 2 years. And I began to ask the question to my dad, geez, why is there so much death around us? And why is no one dealing with it? So I had to deal with my own before actually going out and looking for family. And that has been the most therapeutic, grounding, and just the stories of resilience and connection to family that is truly making me a better person. Whew, y'all. So I'm encouraging you to start your family journey, start talking about it. And if you need help, I'm here. Okay. All right, y'all. So thank you so much for joining me on this journey today with the Please Do Tell podcast. I am your homegirl, Ronnika. Listen, you all know that I am the ancestral archivist. That is one of my branding names. Shout out to the Holmes brothers for even giving that to me. Really, Julius, so thank you for giving me that nickname. And I am able to just do some amazing things, and I want to be able to share them with you. So, and this podcast is one of them. So I want you to be able to share them with a homie, to share with a homie, to share with a homie, okay? Hopefully I didn't lose you too much during the journey because, listen, there's a lot when it comes to ancestry, and that's something I can talk about for hours and hours and hours. So please be sure to share this with a homie. But on the YouTube, I have started to get into shorts. And as I'm continuing to dive through not only my own personal archives, but even my dad, because my dad, one of our shared loves was video and photos. And my dad was the videographer for my my mom's father, retirement party. And it's some footage in there that I cannot share on this podcast because it's quite raunchy, but but the poem I posted on my shorts, and you just tell me what you think. Tell me if you want the whole thing. But it gave me a glimpse into like my grandfather's friends and the neighborhood, because these were his friends, were not only people that he worked with, they lived in the neighborhood as well. So these are a lot of people that I didn't know because I am one of the youngest grandchildren. So as I'm going through these videos, and because that's the only part is my granddad's friend reciting this poem that it's funny, but it's not for kids. I'm just gonna say it's not for kids. And so I'm really getting into the shorts. So be sure to check out my shorts because I'm posting like bloopers of I love game shows. So I'm doing that. And I'm also giving you a snapshot of my own personal life and my obsession with trying to get rid of arachnophobia. But that's the story for another day, y'all, because spiders have been really bad this year, okay? So, again, thank you for joining me on this episode of the Please Do Tell podcast. I am your homegirl, Ronnika, and we will see you next time because you have a story to tell, and you know what? You better tell it. See ya!